had an entrepreneur from a network I'm part of, like last year, she shut down her company. She told me like, this will feel like grieving, like losing a person. And I have to be honest, I just thought like, this sounds a bit dramatic. It's like, this is a bit too much. And when it happened, it's exactly how it felt. Like one of my close friends or relative had passed and there was nothing I can do for it. Like a funeral, it was really terrible. And keep in mind, there's a potential cost when things don't work out, which is statistically very high chance. And so it was lucky I had a good support system and I managed, but it wasn't easy. And I think I'm now getting to a place of like, okay, what's next? It's still a bit in flux.
Welcome to the Rise and Play podcast. I am Sophie Vaux, your host and leadership coach. In the show, my wonderful co-host and I sit down with influential and diverse leaders from the gaming industry to hear about their leadership journey. Not the well-polished stories, but the real stories, the up and down, the breakthrough, and the failures. Or should we rather say learnings? Each episode will transport you into a magical space of vulnerability with our guest. And together, you'll be reminded that no matter how hard it is, you are not alone in this journey and find the courage to keep going. Come and join the ride? Let's begin. And one last thing, I am working on new ideas to scale our impact on leadership health and consciousness in games. Would you like to be part of a change too? Then let's connect. Now, let's get to the episode. So hi everyone, welcome to a new episode of Rise and Play. Today tuning in a different region of the world, of course on my end from Berlin, but I have Allan on the other side of the world calling from Ghana. But before we start, a few words about Allan, Cudicio, and how we've met in Berlin. But Allan is an Italo-Ghanaian game developer passionate about bringing African cultures into gaming. And we've connected back in Berlin when Allan was founding in 2019 Twin Drums, creating the Wagadu Chronicles, the first Afro-fantasy MMORPG. And before that, Allan worked over a decade in gaming and began in marketing before transitioning into game design, team management, and contributing to projects like Candy Crush. And you did work also at Wooga, if I'm correct. Yeah, so that's how we shared some common experience and we've met. And it was a whole journey. And here also, a spoiler alert or disclaimer, unfortunately, Twin Drums doesn't exist anymore. And we will go through the journey of you as an entrepreneur, founder, and CEO of what was the context in 2019, the journey, and then the after and the closing, because unfortunately, we see quite a lot of learning from companies that are making it. By making it, I mean receive funding, keep living. That doesn't mean they still make a game that found product market fits or revenues. And we don't hear often enough from the learnings of companies that, did not make it in the external definition, but where still the learnings are very much there. And that's the space I want to create for you today. So thanks, Allan, for tuning in this morning and calling from Ghana with all the technicalities and connection. Welcome.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Sophie. It's like, I really need to agree and say that this topic is just something you don't hear much about. So I think it's really wonderful that you're spending time and focus to actually highlight people who have experienced this like me and be more open about the topic. So thanks for having me.
Mm-hmm. So let's begin with origins, the origin story. So I'm curious, 2019, I remember that coffee, we sat down, actually down my train in Friedrichshain. It was a different context and time in the industry where there was a lot of hope, more money available. And so I'm curious, what was the turning point in 2019? What were you doing before and led you to just go on and create your company in 2019 with Twin Drums? So hearing more about the origin of the company.
Yeah. So I definitely knew since a very long time that eventually I wanted to start my own thing. So for me, like getting into gaming many years ago was about eventually kind of starting my own thing. So this I knew. It was kind of, I thought I put in a tiny, colorful box, left it somewhere there and thought, okay, one day I'm going to go back to this. But I need to build my experience to become more knowledgeable. And I felt that in 2019, the conditions that I had in mind since many years were being fulfilled. So especially around like having enough knowledge, having worked with different teams, see like different phases of game development. So I felt like the stars were aligning and the work I'd done previously was leading me to that moment. And there was also another factor that I have to add, very, very personal, which was like I felt that I was constantly fighting to get kind of narratives related to who I am, like a person of African descent, into games. It was also a bit exhausting. So I was like, I still have the knowledge. I really feel this need to tell stories that like kind of resonate more with who I am. And everything kind of started falling together in 2019.
So walk me through really the steps as when you are an employee, you have security, stability. And I think one point important, you always had eyes on your North Star that you were planning to build your own company. So I think that's an important point, that everything before was towards that direction. But as you started, how did you start at that time where, it's today a very different context? Did you have a network to begin with, or it was just you? Did you put your own funding? Did you have external funding?
Really great question. And I think for the full disclaimer, I feel like some of these choices I made at the time, I didn't even fully realize where they lead me, which might sound like a bad thing, but it's also a bit of a good thing, because it's like, I think if you know like all of the trouble you have to go through to actually run it, and all the instability and everything that you kind of lose, like by just giving up a job in a great company with like a monthly salary and employees and everything, it's a lot. So I think that there was definitely, like, to be fully honest, looking back, some almost idealism of naivety around having a company, which I think was good. It served me well. So I feel like, next company I would do differently, but I think it was good to have that at that time. Everything was very bootstrapped at the beginning. And what I did was actually, I was very open with Wuga, the company I was working for at the time, and told them, hey, I have this side project. Can we sign a little contract? So everything is like very open. I wanted to be very clear and straightforward. And then I had agreed that a few hours a week on my spare time, they knew I was working on this game, which was not competing with any game at Wuga, but just to be super open. I like to do things as clear and make sure everybody's on the same page. And then I started several months working on this on the side. And my idea was like, if I feel momentum, I continue. If not, I drop it. And one thing that really helped me was like creating an IP early on, which I know is not everybody's approach, but creating a world, because I knew the intellectual property was going to be fundamental to this company. And then testing it, which for me meant running role-playing games, like tabletop role-playing games with dice and pencils around tables with friends and colleagues, seeing how they reacted to this world. And that kind of momentum I got some very positive reactions on this world, which was which is Wagadu, and it's like this African-inspired fantasy world. It made me feel, okay, like the IP is getting this good traction. And then I decided to bring it to social media, which was the next step of iteration of testing. And I got I went viral basically at some point. And I knew, okay, I think it's really time to give it this thing, full-time energies. And I decided then to quit the job, go full-time. And the next step was a Kickstarter, which I did having already left my job, and went well, and then led to investment and so on.
Which I would say is still very relevant, and even more of these days. So very honorable at the time that maybe there was more money to even test for yourself, right? So here for the learning for listeners, I think when you can start something on the side while having security to explore, it's a good idea, because you don't know even yourself if you would enjoy doing this. Everything is an idea, an imagination at this point until it becomes real. So that's great that you started this way, being very also open and transparent to make it work at your company. So Wuga, I can only say very good words about Wuga as a culture, very supportive of entrepreneurs.
Yep.
Having been also at Wuga and proving for yourself that there was something there, and then deciding the momentum. So that I think is already one learning in itself. As you test your ideas, it adds more pressure, unnecessary pressure, to not have financial stability and to put the extra hours to figure out if that's even a viable business or direction. And the Kickstarter, so how much were you raising at the time? How much it took to close the campaign? What was the time between the moment you had the idea to you went full-time on Twin Drums?
There was, I think, roughly a year from when I started working on the Wagadu Chronicle at Wuga and the campaign. And maybe the last 6 months got more intense. So one full year thinking from like, okay, what am I doing here? Let me start brainstorming and so on. Literally like kind of shower thoughts to then like, yeah, I mean, of course, these things are like very, I would say like diffuse because, as we creative people do, like you always have some bunch of ideas that are actually much earlier on in your career and life. And then everything started coalescing for me, I would say, around, like a year before, and the last 6 months before the campaign were more really full on working on it a lot. The Kickstarter campaign, I'd say for best practices of Kickstarter, it was kind of started quite late, like the whole getting traction, social media, doing a newsletter. But there was a bit of luck involved as well. And I think I made some right decisions around, for instance, sharing lots of arts and like the IP and realizing that that's what people wanted to see a lot about. So that kind of created like a very quick wave that brought the momentum for the Kickstarter. And the Kickstarter goal was around €100,000, and which would not have been enough to actually finish an online role-playing game, which is the Wagadu Chronicles, the original concept. But the thing is, I had at the same time gotten in touch with Riot Games, who was at the time looking to support underrepresented founders. And literally in parallel, some people actually think from this, I actually had the Kickstarter campaign first. Truth is, I went in parallel with both. And they were like, yeah, this sounds interesting. And then I was like, we're doing a Kickstarter. Look at this. We're great. And then when the Kickstarter was going well, then I also got validation for Riot Games. And they were looking for like founders that were not just, of course, of minorities, but also that had some really knowledge and business traction and so on, because they wanted to make an actual investment, not just a donation. And the two things kind of worked well together. And then so I ended up being able also to have a lower campaign goal because I knew that there was money from Riot Games potentially coming in if everything went well. And so it was kind of like an interesting chicken and egg situation where everything helped each other, like a positive reinforcement. And then there was like a decent budget to start working on the game at the end of the Kickstarter.
How much was that in total?
I know with Riot Games, it's always tricky to talk about numbers openly, but what I can say is like in the hundreds of thousands. So a few hundred thousand to start with. And that was definitely a good number at the beginning to have like a very indie kind of small version of the game and to start off things. Of course, this is game development. So as we're working on the game, we realized that we needed much more money. So I ended up raising more in the low millions at the end of everything. But this was kind of the initial budget, was in the hundreds of thousands.
Okay, that's a good start. What you can think as an amount as proceed. So I have some follow-up question more on the IP creation and the traction that you started to see and bring. What was missing in the space for the audience that really followed the IP you were building with Wagadu Chronicles? And what do you represent it for gamers, representation of culture? Because for a movement to exist, there's something that matters for an audience to follow, right? So what were the learnings here of maybe the gaps that still remain in the gaming market and maybe still remain today?
Yeah. To tell a short story of like, I think it was maybe 10 years ago, I used to go to lots of game jams, like global game jam, local game jams, trying to kind of improve my game development skills. I remember once it was at a game jam where we're brainstorming what kind of concepts to do. And I had this idea of a concept of a very simple platformer game of an African girl in a slum trying to kind of find like ancient forgotten gods in the slum. And when I pitched it to the people at the game jam, the reactions I got was so peculiar. Like people were kind of scared by the concept. One even told me like, oh, I don't want to make a sad game. And others were like, I want to do something more interesting or exciting. Like, and I just realized people were thinking about starving children, war. And the thing is like in slums, not just in Africa, also in South America and Asia, like people have lives, have shops, go to university. It's like, of course, there's poverty, but it's not like, a one single story and picture. And I realized not just also about slums, it's about Africa in general. Like people had one stereotypical view, and making media, in this case games, telling different stories and nuance was just not something they understood. I just came in naively as someone who is half African, have lived in Africa. And of course, I know that there's so many different people and stories and experiences here. And I was a bit shocked. And I thought like, wow, we're really behind and this is going to be a problem. And I need to do something about this one day. So I think that was really like a catalyst. And then also working in larger companies. I was even once at a meeting discussing a tutorial for a new game. And a white colleague mentioned having the tutorial character being a wise Black woman that would teach you things. And one person in the room, a manager, said, we cannot have a wise Black woman, because players don't associate wisdom to that kind of ethnicity in person. This was openly said in a meeting, in an international. And I was just sitting there, still quite junior at that point, thinking like, wow, like, luckily there was a follow-up in the situation, so that there was like, luckily, the thing got reprimanded. But like, I still think that someone felt at the senior level to be able to speak openly this way. And there also other things happen. So I realized, that I wanted to set these examples, even if they're a bit strong, just to show like it's not just something in my head that I was like, oh, I have this feeling that people are not like, no, it was real. I was sitting in rooms having these conversations, and people had prejudice, lack knowledge. And on the other hand, I was noticing lots of not only Black folks, but people in general being so curious or learning more about African cultures and like just cultures that are not just the usual Viking. As much as I love Viking games, don't get me wrong, but the usual Viking is usually either Europe or maybe Japan, but there's not much else, right? So it's like there's so many awesome stories and many people want to hear them. So this is where the need arose. And I think Black Panther, the movie, was really a game changer in that sense, because it proved to me and many other creators that there is an interest. And it's not just like Black people went to watch the movie. Like, it was a top grossing movie in general, right? Not just like Black people. So yeah, I think there was a confluence of personal experiences, the market showing an opening and then a direction. And are we there, Sophie, now? Like, I would say no, but we're slowly moving in that direction. And I think I also did my part, even if Twin Rams, unfortunately, is wrapping up, just part of a journey globally.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up, because, those stories, we all have our lens of the world and experience. And, we talk a lot about diversity in industry, in games, at work. But it's also acknowledging the story that we also have quite different story as a receiver.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, the people who are in position of power and decision making, they are seeing the world through the lens, and it's influencing the decision. So I can imagine how difficult that is to pitch something that feels so natural for you, that is not even on the radar for decision makers that are from different culture, who are white. And at some point, I can understand also why at some point it was very just not even an option anymore. I just do my thing, prove, which you did, the traction, and pave the way for others to see there's much more stories to tell the world. And thankfully with Blockbuster, there's also really that awareness that as, entertainment consumers, we are craving for stories. And sometimes we limit ourselves with stereotype of stories. There's Asian story, there's an African story, there's whatever story, but it's a whole region that is so rich with very different culture by regions, mythology. So we're just scratching the surface here. Coming from Asian origin, as well, there's so many different stories that just not globally shared, but if they would be brought globally, they will create a lot of also joy and depth into the content we consume as consumers and players. I feel you there for the journey. And like you said, I hope with this interview today that you give full visibility on what you've done. It's encouraging others to not stop there, because the movement, it doesn't stop as just one idea, one attempt. It is a movement. The force has already started, and it's for many more to pick it up, as you're not the only, African game developer in the industry, but maybe who didn't even see that it was possible to even start something. Let's go a bit further into your journey. As you started, you have your funding, you start, it's your first company. The first year, how did you start? Were you with other co-founders? Were you by yourself? What went well? And what was a struggle as a first-time founder?
It was a very positive and exciting moment for the company. So just kind of as a disclaimer, it was a positive experience, because I know, it's a lot, but I think it's important to highlight also the fun of it, the excitement of it, because those are some of the reasons why we do this, why we're entrepreneurs, right? And I considered having a co-founder, and I spoke, especially there was one person, a really incredible and smart African woman I wanted to work with, but she had her own ideas for her own thing, and I think she's still doing them now. And so we didn't end up aligning enough. And I remember then thinking, should I keep on searching, speaking with others, or going on my own? And I actually decided to just strike on my own because I felt like the risks of finding someone that is not the perfect person outweigh going solo. I still don't regret the decision. Next company, I'm not sure go solo, but I think it was the right decision at the time with the knowledge I had, because also working with others required certain set of skills and everything. And I was building a lot of skills at the same time. And also feel like broadly looking back, I think that most decisions I made as a solo founder can still stand by. There's things I've improved and do differently, but overall, I don't think that being a solo founder was one of the main issues I had. And the first year was very much a lot about building the team, finding people, especially at the beginning, like the money was tight. So also trying to find like this balance between like experienced people, not junior people. And I think in that sense, I got it right. Like I realized I wasn't just building one product, the video game, the Wagadu Chronicles and the books, but also another product, second product, which was the company Twin Drums with its culture and everything and like its structure. And to be honest, now after a few years, I would say like the company product is maybe even more important. But at the time, I started as thinking about the project. Then I kind of realized, there's a company that I think I realized well enough. And so the first year was really a lot about also building that culture and company and realizing, for instance, I wanted to try and keep the team at least 50% non-cis men. And I actually managed to do that throughout the whole company till we closed. And something I'm very proud of as a cis man, since I cannot be seen on camera. And also like having a very strong culture around like communication and respect and like to avoid crunch while keeping quality. So these are things that quite early on, like I think, and I had leadership experience from before, which of course helped. So I think the first year was a lot of this and trying to also get like something running, of course, on the other side for the game side of things.
So how big was your team? Where were they located? Were you working remotely? Which is also a challenge. As you know, you form a new team.
Yeah.
You haven't worked together. Trust takes time to build. So it's another layer of challenge if you work remotely and building something that they haven't done before. So how did it go with the team forming and composition?
Yeah. So I definitely tapped on ex-colleagues a lot. So several members of the team I had worked with or had worked with someone I was hiring. And this was very helpful because, as you're saying, like there's many challenges around, like building something with people you don't know, something new. Working remotely because of the pandemic at the time also like was definitely...
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah, it made things easier. And to be honest, like I decided I wanted a remote team before even everything happened. And so I think that just felt validating in that sense. I mean, it was a horrible thing over many other ways, but like definitely felt validating. Like, okay, it has an additional reason for the resilience of the company. There was also a big factor of me wanting to be able to tap more easily on diverse talent, different people around the world. So at some point, Twin Drums had people from like 4 different continents, even if the majority of the team was still Europe-based and Germany-based. And also like the size of the team, we started around maybe 6-7 people, and then it peaked at around 20 employees and then went down when things kind of were winding down. That could be kind of a whole separate podcast around the size of the company because it was pretty amazing how it felt like different companies, like the 6 to 10, 12 people versus the 20 people plus collaborators. It's really really different games. It requires completely different skill set for you as an entrepreneur, learning where to delegate, how, what. So that was also very interesting to experience. And many of these things, I think you read them, I also went to business school. And many things I kind of read or like you just, watching the videos, reading about other companies, but then experiencing it's something else. Like, for instance, the gap between, the 10 and 20 people.
Like you said, like there's a layer of remote and you grow the company and like all of that happened within the first years. So it's quite a lot for a change of company. And it's a very common story and challenge of scaling a team. I've experienced that also. And then you have a core, and then the core is changing as you grow the team and as the project also grows. And during those first years of development, maybe to look at it with a more meta view, what were the breakthrough that you've achieved with the game, with the audience? Did it hit the market? What was the point when it started to be the end? I don't know if you reached fully the market. So if you can walk us through the production to closing time.
So basically, around 2.5 years ago, that was when, so roughly, like, let's say midway in the journey, as best practice dictates, and I strongly agree that's a good thing to do. We wanted to test things as early as possible, get players in. So then we had like some alphas, players were like coming in and trying things and giving us feedback. And I'll say like, looking back, this was for me in some ways the peak moment of Twin Brands because the funding was still looking quite good. We managed to get these alphas out and we're getting feedback. But also for me, like where the trajectory started going eventually towards where would have been the closure, because later on, okay, I had to start raising again, as it's usual, and the market changed, right? And it was first little signs and it got worse and worse. And if you look at industries like solar panels, even like space travel, everything that's very innovative, typically it's governments that kickstart the innovation for a long time and sinking a lot of money. And then later on, you see the various SpaceX for space travel, or like Chinese profitable companies for solar panels, or and you see this kind of pattern happening a lot in lots of innovation. And what WinRams was doing was very innovative, like creating an IP based on cultures that the world has mostly actually oppressed and tried to destroy in the last couple of centuries. So it's really like something quite against the grain of like the evolution of globalization and of Western societies. And also the mechanics themselves, as an MMO, it was an MMO that had a very different twist, focusing more on like socialization, less on competition, more on storytelling, which also like was going to beat against the grain of what mainstream works for multiplayer out there, which is more competitive, more aggressive, team-based fighting. And that's also one thing that looking back, it's a valid argument that could be made. Maybe I should have focused on maybe a bit less innovation on the topics. But anyways, like having these things meant that Twin Rams and the project, the Wagadu Chronicles, was started falling quite quickly, especially with money running out and fundraising being harder, towards the spectrum of high innovation, or like, I'll say, quote unquote, almost too much innovation. And there's no like government or NASA or video games that says like, this is very innovative. You want to go with the moon with this game. Let's do this. There was some, government grants. Definitely, I'm super grateful to the German government that this happened. It really helped us get what we got. But it was not enough. And the investors and publishers, they definitely saw these risks and they were not palatable for them. So then at some point, we saw what we had to do to keep on improving the game. We got great feedback. We had a community around 1,000 alpha players. That was awesome. But then slowly we started not having the money and resources to do those changes and to iterate, because if you know game development, you know that iteration based on feedback is super important. And I think for me, that's where looking back, the issues started. So we just were like, okay, let's try and kind of hack a bit things, keep going and keep on fundraising until hope at some point we will have the money and then we can do those changes retroactively. That never happened because the money never came. And so then everything kind of went to survival mode until we did manage at the end of last year to release a Steam Early Access version, which was like basically a glorified beta, I would say, like where we had added the full loop, just playable. And some people did play for many, many weeks the game, which is something I'm very grateful to those players that they decided to invest so much time in the game. But clearly we knew, okay, this is like basically an advanced beta with many things we want to change and fix, and based on the player feedback, where we can't because the investors and publishers are kind of too scared by the innovation, their innovation. There's no additional public funding that we can use for this. And so basically last year, GDC, after a last-ditch attempt to pitch, I was also looking to maybe pitch for another game in the same IP that would allow the company to stay afloat and to keep slowly developing the Wagadu Chronicles. That didn't work. Actually, I had 2 deals and they both fell apart within months. And so GDC, I came back very dejected, realizing, okay, like, I've been trying really hard since basically alpha times to make this work. I was also seeing what other things were being invested in. I was seeing how the money was dramatically increasing. Also, there's one thing worth mentioning, that there was an article that came, I think a while ago, I forgot who wrote it, or probably Google can help, that when the money decreased for investment, specifically for underrepresented creators, I think that it was a 70% decrease, that's 1 year for everybody, and then 98% decrease for underrepresented founders. So basically, and I get it, because if you are, I spoke with lots of investors and publishers, it's mostly white cis men in the West. If you are trying to reduce risk, you are going to focus on what you know already, and definitely a more social, less competitive, kind of construction-based, village-focused online role-playing game inspired by African mythologies is not what you would as identity. And I'm saying this relatively neutral because I'm trying also like not to go into this victim mode, even if I've had moments where like I felt frustrated. This is how the world is. And at some point as an entrepreneur, you just have to look at the things, be realistic, and then think what the next step is.
Thanks. That's that's a lot. And it also shows how much you've spent the time reflecting on it. So I'm very grateful for that. I'm also processing those. And one thing I'll say that come out of how you're talking about it is a lot of maturity. Because I can tell you there are also many entrepreneurs that shut down the studio and we never heard back from them. I was even an investor in one of them and trying to have a conversation, and like there's so much shame. And then I don't think it's healthy also for the person who has to go forward, because it's difficult to build a company, then a hit and all those things, and just keeping it for yourself and not doing that process of grieving and processing and moving on. So I can see a lot of the internal work you've done. So just for that, wanted to acknowledge it.
Thanks.
And like you said, also as an entrepreneur, not taking the victim place, but also observing the patterns. And it's not like working with the rules, but understanding them. And it's learnings that you'll take for your next initiative, venture project.
Yes.
I'm sure there will be more to it, because this first company was the catalyst of what's next for you. And I don't think your mission will go away in giving more visibility, breaking walls, offering more visibility, access to the story and the wealth of different cultures. And I completely relate to that. Again, like for me, coming from not the West, but I grew up in the West, right? And I could see those conflicts.
Yeah, same here. I also grew up in the West, so I'm very sure.
Yes, exactly. So we are, we are fitting in, but there's a part of our heart and the soul that just is not fully there, because we have our origins. It's our genes, it's our ancestors, it's our family or tradition, so there's a conflict, a real conflict there. And at some point there's almost like internal rebellion. It's like, I don't want to play that role anymore because that's not me. It's a journey to create our space. I would say it's not find our space, create, because it has to be created.
Agreed.
Okay. So through that closing process, as you saw that it would be difficult to raise, and you also shared maybe like the focus, which is something I found as well going through my own fundraising process earlier this year, but working with other founders who are fundraising, it becomes a distraction where exactly you try to put all the efforts and energy instead of solving a question for your business. That's a very important learning, and maybe a reminder here for entrepreneurs starting. It's you can't rely on the money that you may get in the future because it may never come. And what can you do with what you have now?
Amen.
So I'm curious here more on the internal journey for you as a founder, entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Because I was talking about that shame journey, and when you decided to close officially, I'm sure there was a whole journey behind the curtain that happened until you can talk about it on this podcast today.
Yeah.
So where are you now, and what has happened the past 6 months for, your journey?
I have a comment on something you said. I want to just strongly agree. I think it's very, very wise around the topic of investors and to some extent publishers. Like there's this view that is like an unadulterated positive. Like you have to, everybody wants to get an investor. Like you have it, it's a privilege, it's the best thing ever. And now I must say, I had some amazing investors, both Riot Games and OneUp Ventures, really great people. Like I'd always recommend them to anybody who wants an investor. But the thing is, do you actually need it? Like what you want and what you need might not be the same, right? You think you want an investor, do you need an investor? And eventually you might realize that you don't actually want one after all. And that's something I think I've noticed also other fellow entrepreneurs who have gone through the whole cycle. I've heard it again and again. So it's like, it was not what we actually wanted, because it creates like a different set of expectations and goals. And like you actually want to 10x or 100x your business. Are you okay with just being profitable with your game? Are you okay with keeping the team small and just being happy boutique kind of game development? Do you necessarily want to become the next EA Games? These kind of questions that I think people should be asking themselves sometimes a bit more. Yeah, but this said, on the question that you asked me of where I'm now, so, I'll be fully frank and honest. Like, I think it was, from a mental health point of view, like very challenging. And I am known to be a very positive person, always cheering up. It's who I am. And I think this summer, when after GDC, when I decided to wrap up things, I felt really down. Like I'd never experienced that kind of like demotivation. And I do see it as a growth experience. because I think I better understand also people who have this chronically, and I think it was like yeah, you have to learn from your life experiences. And I definitely did in that case, but it was not easy. It was not easy because I realized it was, I had an entrepreneur from a network I'm part of, like last year, she shut down her company and she told me, like, very experienced, much older than me. And she was like, this will feel like grieving, like losing a person. And I have to be honest, I just thought like, this sounds a bit dramatic. It's like, this is a bit too much. And when it happened, it's exactly how it felt. Like one of my close friends already had passed and there was nothing I can do for it. And, it's like a funeral. It was really terrible. And I know it's not the same for everybody. I think it also depends on where you're coming from. And like in her case, in my case as well, we actually poured our hearts. It wasn't just like, let me try and do something to get money from investors and see if I can make some money and become rich. And then I have other 20 things I want to do anyways. It was really like, this is something that we believe has a cultural impact, is really as a vision of who we are, that we're pouring our hearts in it, which I think it's a good way. Like, don't get me wrong, to start a company doesn't have to be this way, but I think it's a good way. But then there is also to keep in mind there's a potential cost when things don't work out, which is statistically very high chance. And so, yeah, it was lucky I had a good support system and I managed, but it wasn't easy. And I think there was lots of like post-morteming, if that's a verb I just created it, I'm not sure. And thinking about things, processing. And I'm now getting to definitely a place of like, okay, what's next? Although it's still a bit in flux. Before I was looking at the past and kind of mourning, and now I'm looking at the future and there's some floating question marks. And I'm kind of like, trying to shine some light on what's next.
Wow, it's very remarkable, I have to say, that attitude. Again, I think you maybe not realizing it just for what was achieved, what it meant. I think collecting, carving, documenting all that happened in your history will help you, feel good about what you've achieved, as a team, what you showed was possible, and all the learnings, and even that this attitude now, which tells me a lot about the person you are as an entrepreneur and, just as a person. So I hope you can see that also for yourself. I just wanted to say that.
You.
And that grieving journey that you mentioned is very difficult. And that's why it takes even courage to talk about it, because I don't know, and maybe this is where it's a bit different for when I say some of us, when we are not in the position of privilege and having all these expectations to fulfill, to be perfect, to be powerful, to be a success. We come from a place where we are learning all the time, right? So
yes.
There's a different attitude I've noticed with men entrepreneurs that might be underrepresented, coming with a humble attitude of learning because you keep learning. That's our journey. And a different attitude, I'm on the top because by who I am, and I can't admit that I failed here. It's not possible. It's unfortunate because a lot of the learnings and the growth is there. And otherwise, it's an impossible game to play. You have to just only do things that will make you look good instead of learning. So, and you didn't do that. So I hope it's an inspiration for others to give permission, whatever the culture, the background is, white, as we say, that you have to meet the expectation, to also give permission to share the learnings. And postmortem, you said you share, very important. I've also seen company closing, not doing a postmortem. I've done postmortem also for a studio I closed in the past, and it was a liberating process for the team, for myself, just to look back as we were like, whoa, oh my God, we did so much. So very important. So if some of you have closed a team, something, a studio, please at least minimum do a postmortem. Let's close then on, as we went through, I feel it's like a movie in itself, like the birth of creation of something, the hope, the realization, the frustration, the grief, and now hope again. Connecting here more to your intuition and where you are, your heart. What are some aspirations taking you in the future? It doesn't have something to be thought through, that you plan, but some direction that you feel you want to spend energy on in the future.
Yeah. So one thing that's really kind of came out of all of this experience, and I want to actually clarify that I think one moment of growth is definitely realizing, first of all, that even if this is something you don't want, like I did not want Twin Drums shut down, I didn't want the game not to be financially successful, I didn't want to lose the amazing team of people I built, which was, I know it's a bit cliche, but it did like a family. I'm worried about that term, but in this case, I think it really applied. So kind of seeing all this go, I would have wanted it, but I think getting this experience and all the learnings, I think for me, like one of the realizations has been coming to accept it as a gift in some way, like something that the older I get, I'm going to turn 40 next year, so it's coming. The
Yeah, me
wiser,
too.
yeah.
Me
Okay,
too,
great.
yeah.
Yes. Yeah, and I'm actually kind of excited. Other people are going, wow, because that's another thing, difference between Western cultures and like some other cultures. Like growing older is kind of good in many cultures. Like people treat it with more respect. Some languages even have different ways of like addressing you. And I'm not even 40 yet, right? Like these experiences, I'm like, wow, I've learned so much. And this failure, because in some ways, of course, I'm okay with calling it failure. I'm not scared of the word. It's also like one of the best blessings I've had in my 30s because I've grown so much. I've pushed myself to the limit. I've been almost broken in some ways, but in the end, I wasn't. And I'm whole. And this means that I'm going to be so much stronger and do so many more things in the coming decade I'm really excited about. And one thing, for me that already happened is that I've been asking myself, what's my vision? What drives me? And I've noticed that in general, sharing, African cultures, or specifically Ghanaian in my case, and also Ga, which is the ethnic group of my mom and my mom's family, is very important for me. And I see like a lot of these cultures, because of colonialism, neocolonialism, capitalism, many of these elements are disappearing, like sacred groves, nature worship, ancestor worship. Like these things have a lot of meaning. And even if I'm a game developer, I like technology, I like modernity. It's not like, I want to go back to 200 years ago. I'm also a queer person, so I think modernity has brought a lot of good things. But also there's like many things in which not necessarily the present or the future is going in the right direction. I think that's kind of my vision, like how do we connect the dots between the past and the future? So the Wagadu Chronicles was a way to do this through a medium I really love, but that's not the only way. And one thing that happened recently, actually, I think it's the first time we mentioned it in public. A few weeks ago, I got officially initiated in the traditional Ga spirituality
Wow.
Southern Ghana, which means I'm learning more and more about, like, as I said, the nature worship, ancestor worship, how things have been done for centuries, if not millennia. And I'm able to kind of bring this knowledge forward throughout, humanity. And I think that's something that brought me a lot of joy. And it felt like a beautiful way to kind of wrap up this chapter and to open the next one, because I know that this is kind of knowledge I will keep on holding and sharing. And is it going to be another video game? Is it going to be other ways to do this? Like I'm, now thinking about it, and I feel like I see games as one of the very beautiful ways to share stories, but it's not the only way. So I'm now, let's stay in touch. You'll see what happens. I'm like kind of exploring what the next chapter looks like. But I think it's having felt even more what my goal, my vision is, and what my purpose is definitely being a positive outcome of all of this. And I recommend anybody having a company to think about it, because it really helps. It can be hard, but it really helps.
Wow, I get the shivers with what you shared on the last part. It's beautiful.
Thanks, Sophie.
I don't know what to speechless. We will talk way more off the record. I've been on a journey as well there, back to the origins and connecting some origins, very ancestral to also the work I do and for the movement of the world forward, because it's happening. This globalization, culture, blending, rebalancing, and we are part of this movement, and we are accelerating it or go against. But I think here it's very clear the choice, the position we take. It's beautiful, Allan. I'm so grateful for everything you share with an open heart and mind. It's amazing. And that's a way for me to get to know you in a very intimate way today, more than our coffee a few years ago. And so I'm very glad we had that moment. And I'm sure the listeners also will feel very deeply connected with what you shared and can reach out to you. Let's close the conversation today. And Atlas, is there something I didn't ask I should have asked you?
I think if there's one thing maybe I could say, find mentors, people who have gone through this already and experience travelers and been through that journey. I feel like I got to the stage of having good mentors a bit too late. It was still useful, but I really had some aha moments in which I thought like, oh, if I had this person in my journey 1 year ago, 2 years ago, I mean, I don't know, maybe the ending would have still been the same, but even the how you get to things and even the how you get to closing a company can be very different, have like very different impacts, and be much more in control or, like just feel very different. So I'd say like just get someone experienced, like some mentors, some people you can resonate with as early as possible.
That's a very good advice and reminder. And I can double down on that because in my coaching, I've been doing actually exactly that with entrepreneurs who just decided
Awesome.
to not leave it to chance, because it's hard to find mentors who will find free time and for free, right? So in the end, I found also entrepreneur who just invested is like, it's a lot of on my shoulder. And I want to share that burden with other professionals that will help me achieve, my goals and avoid errors. So let's break the myth of a solo entrepreneur. Like, you have it all. It's going to be a journey very difficult, and finding collaborators, partner, investing in both is a game changer. So thanks for mentioning it.
Yep. Thank you for having me and allowing me to say all these things.
Yeah, well, it was amazing, Allan. I look forward to connecting back with you in Berlin in the gray winter, where it's not like that where you are right now.
I'll bring some sun from Ghana. I'll bring some sun.
Yeah, you are the sun. So
Thank
just
you.
you and your energy are the sun. I look forward to hearing more about your future development. I'm sure there will be more to it. We'll share. Thanks, and have a great day and take care.
You too. Thank you so much, Sophie. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this latest episode of the Rise and Play podcast. We keep growing our community of conscious leaders across the industry and beyond. If you want to join this movement, please share the podcast with other conscious leaders, because we have so much more we can learn from each other. And if you want to accelerate your growth, I offer creative leadership coaching and workshop, plus other free resources that you can find on riseandplay.io. I can't wait to connect with you. Have a great week, and remember to take care of yourself. Until the next time,